The vice president has had the full, not just the full, but the enthusiastic, delirious, delighted, unified, coherent, cohesive support of her party over the past week. Something people weren't sure was going to happen. Man, the party really lined up behind her, a who's who of Democratic up-and-coming leaders, including Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. You name them in the party, they are behind Vice President Harris, and she has, in this past week, kicked her campaign into high gear in a stunningly short amount of time. According to the campaign, they have recruited 170,000 new volunteers since last Sunday and held 2,300 events to mobilize grassroots supporters. This past weekend alone, they've also raised, wait for it, $200 million in 7 days, with 2/3 of that money coming from first-time donors. There's also, on the large dollar side, I think they have another $150 million in commitments of money going potentially into super PACs and other places. The money is just coming in hand over fist. Vice President Harris, for her part, she's embraced all that enthusiasm naturally, and loves the fact that the base has rallied to her and that the institutional part of the party has. But she's also cautioning that this campaign is far from over, far from won, a long way from that. She tells supporters this weekend, this is what she said. She said, "We are the underdogs in this race, but this is a people-powered campaign and we have momentum." And if you look at the polling, that's certainly true. Claire, Eddie, Mike, Memoli, you're all back. And Mike, I want to ask you that question because we're talking about this, about the politics of this right now. There's the fact that there's no, when people talk about the pros and cons of the different ways this could have gone once President Biden had decided to step aside, the fact that whatever the pros of the reason why you would want to have an open, competitive contest, as some people wanted, with a mini primary, with town hall meetings or debates or whatever. The biggest downside to it is that trying to start a presidential campaign at this late date, from a standing start, building an operation, a digital team, a field team, a fundraising team, I would say impossible. Impossible. She, Vice President Harris, is inheriting a team that's already out there in all the battleground states, and a really savvy digital operation, and a bunch of people who do rapid response, and people who are obviously raising money. But there's still a lot to do real fast. And the integration of her existing team, the existing Biden forces, and potentially bring in some people from the outside who have the esteem and reverence of the party, those are all on the table. Talk about where things stand right now in terms of the bootstrapping, the combination bootstrapping and inheriting of an existing operation, the melding of that as we sit here today.
I mean, operationally, this campaign was ready to go. I mean, they have a really strong foundation to build on, and the team that was helping build that is still there, very much overseeing it. I think the big question is, what is the Harris message, right? She's enjoying this honeymoon period. She is able to ride on that enthusiasm, that excitement. But there is going to be a point when these voters want to know, well, what would you do differently than President Biden? What is your vision for the country? And there's, I think, a good debate to be had about whether she does need to develop her own distinct political identity at this moment. Because one of the failings that people who are close to President Biden felt about his debate performances, all you needed to do on that debate stage was a noun, a verb, Dobbs, a noun, a verb, democracy, a noun, a verb, felon, right? And that would have been enough for those voters who were just starting to tune in to get you through to November. She has an even shorter timeline now, and perhaps that's all she needs to do on this stump with her running mate at this point. The focus, more than anything, is now back on Donald Trump from the view of so many Democrats. And the president and former President Trump's going to have to be out there on the campaign trail more this fall, too. And the more that they can run on enthusiasm, run on the future, and then point to him, that might be enough to get them through November.
Eddie, 99 days to November 5th.
Right.
20 days until the Democratic convention starts. You are suddenly, unexpectedly, the nominee of your party. You have to pick a vice president. You have to figure out make new ads that are going to go on the air in the face of negative ads coming in from the other side. You have to figure out how to integrate these teams. You have to do a whole bunch of research on yourself that you haven't had really done. You've done some of it, but not in the way that a presidential campaign that's been ramping up for a year and a half would have done. What if you think about what they need to get done, Vice President Harris's operation between now and let's just focus on the convention. What's the high order bit? Like, what are you focused on? What's the thing that the big thing that you got to get right, or it could really cripple your campaign for what happens after the convention?
Well, I don't want to presume that I'm a political operative. Like
no,
but
you're a voter.
But I am a voter, and I think the two things that have to happen, that must happen, right, is that she has to introduce herself to the country. This is who I am. These are my animating values and qualities. And she has to be clear about her message. And I think we have the beginnings of that. We're not going back. And what does that mean? We're not going to go back to what this guy's trying to do. And we're not going to go back to the old categories, the old divisions, those old divisions between left and right, the old divisions between liberal and conservative. What we're going to try to do is govern for everyday ordinary folk. We're going to address the conditions of workers, those folks whose noses are barely above water. We're going to try to deal with those kitchen table issues without the baggage of our previous politics. And I think if she leans into that, we are not going back, and begin to give voice to what a substantive notion of the public good is, right, John? I think a substantive notion of what the public good is by way of policy. Now we're opening up the door to a different kind of conversation. But maybe I'm sounding like an academic egghead in this moment, right? But I do think, what does it mean to give content to the idea that we're not going back?
Right.
Other than just simply that guy is the past.
You sound like an egghead, Eddie, but we love eggheads. And eggheads are us. I want to put up a little, here's a full screen New York Magazine cover. Let's put that up. Can we put that up? There it is. Welcome to Camelot. We've had a lot of discussion about this. We've got Charlie XCX. She's Brat. Mike Memley, he's Brat. Claire McCaskill, she's Brat. She's Brat too. We've never seen anything. People have made this comparison, Claire, a lot in the last week, which is, we haven't seen anything like this since Obama. She's out there in social media. She's all over TikTok. There is this buzz around her that you can't buy it, you can't learn it, you can't prepare for it, you catch it. It's organic, right? When you see all this as you sit there out there in Missouri, do you have any worries about the way that Hollywood and the glamour and the glitz that is kind of going to attach itself to her, that is obviously super important for unifying the party, for bringing money, all those things, but that in the battleground states, among 6 or 7% of the people who haven't decided yet who they want to vote for and are going to decide the election, that some of those things might not wear well over the next 100 days, even if they're absolutely incredibly exciting and positive for her in this moment?
Yeah, I'm not so worried about that. A sprint really is to her benefit. We're the only country that puts people through the minefield, painful, we're going to tear the bark off your tree with negative attacks for, months and months on end. This sprint requires simplicity, and simplicity is her best friend. And I would push back a little bit on the honeymoon notion. Yes, there was this incredible release of pressure due to the painful mess our party was in, with a president that we all loved and respected, and a reality that became clear at the debate, and the sense of urgency about beating Trump. All of that, yes, the pressure was released and certainty has arrived, and everyone is excited about that. But she's also done a really good job. I think people have underestimated Kamala Harris. I think because of her presidential campaign, there was this notion that somehow she was not up to this job. She's up to it. She knows what she's doing. And I think she's going to pick a vice president that grounds this ticket in a way that takes some of that Hollywood glitz off of her candidacy. And she's going to speak in very plain terms, which is really important, about freedom and about the future, about joy and laughter and lightness and aspiration and opportunity, the kinds of things that this country is craving right now because of all the darkness that Donald Trump has brought on to the political scene. And by the way, they're going to come after her, John, with all these negative ads, which are so yesterday. And does anybody think that the swing voters are really going to be persuaded by ads coming from a guy that they know can't take a breath without lying? I just don't think a barrage of Willie Horton type swift boat-esque bull, is going to really slow her down as long as she does what Eddie says. She's got to get her bio out there. She's got to get people have a sense of how she's fought and overcome the odds and done well in America because of the values that we all care about. She's in a really good place. I would much rather be on her side of this equation than Donald Trump's.
She's continuing this dash as the Democrats' presidential nominee with a new ad all about women's rights. And her campaign just sent speakers to a key state where Biden had been trailing Trump when he was the nominee, Pennsylvania.
Vice President Harris has been battle-tested. She is ready to not just be the standard bearer of our party, but to be the 47th president of the United States of America.
Hey, everybody. So today, Iowa put in place a Trump abortion ban, which makes Iowa the 22nd state in our country to have a Trump abortion ban.
Kamala Harris, the prosecutor who keeps communities safe. Kamala Harris, the senator who knows how to deliver results. Kamala Harris, the vice president who puts America back on track.
A couple governors there making the case in front of those Harris for President signs. This is some of the fastest campaign advance work in this cycle, but by necessity, just as Harris is about to pick her running mate. It could be as soon as within a week, according to reports that we have. That's a rush to complete this new ticket long before the convention lands. And you'd have to do the advance work of the signs with the second person's name and the speeches for the convention and all the other stuff that is being packed in. Harris has been at it for 8 days now, with about a dozen weeks until early voting starts, give or take, and 99 days till the election day itself. Her fast ascent has not, we should note, been greeted with any kind of rolling Democratic anxiety about the process that got us here over the last week or the potential alternatives. And I mention that because how quickly things changed. That was the kind of stuff that many D.C. pundits, including sort of center-left pundits, kept talking up during that month of debate about whether Biden was going to drop out and all those hypothetical musings about open conventions, or if the Dems handed it right to her, would there be a legitimacy issue? We're not seeing any of that, even if it was in the minds of the pundits who are, sorry, usually wrong. What are we seeing? Something closer to a kind of united glee, at least within the party. That's the theme of today's new cover of New York Magazine that I'm going to leave up here for you so you can drink it in, like so many pina coladas. It features basically every wing and symbol of the party celebrating and dancing, from Obama and Pelosi to Clooney and Beyonce. And Harris, as you see there, sits quite comfortably and victoriously atop a coconut, a reference to one of her funny viral hits that her fans have claimed as their own. And of course, and you see in the text across the coconut, a possible new moniker, I don't know if it'll stick, Camelot, with a K. That's a remix of the Democrats' favorite long-standing dynasty, Kennedy's Camelot, of course, the JFK era and the Kennedys beyond. Now, that magazine cover, they're having some fun with it, like many of Harris's fans, but the excitement is also serious for the home stretch of a high-stakes, expensive, and hard-fought campaign that we expect. Other accounts have noted how Harris led Democrats in basically a week to do something that had elided this party for many, many months. You watch the news, because if you don't, you wouldn't be hearing me. If you watch the news, I think you know what I'm talking about. I think you lived through it. This now is something that was not happening the last several months. This Democratic Party is united, excited, and back at work. Call it the Kamala Harris vibe shift, as one writer put it in the New York Times, noting the race that felt to many Democrats like a dispiriting slog toward an all but certain defeat suddenly feels lighter, hopeful. People are even feeling, is that joy? And the insiders and pundits who had very clearly diminished Harris during part of her tenure as VP, a role that can temporarily kind of shrink a lot of different political figures, well, that looks like a view, and everyone's entitled to have it. You can have any view you want here in America as long as we remain a civil society. But that view does look more bearish than at least the way the Democratic base is feeling about Harris, if not possibly the wider electorate. Because people are now taking in Kamala Harris as a somewhat familiar quantity whose stock appears to be rising, as clips new and old of her zing around the web with a kind of palpable excitement that this is now different than the current president. This is the voice of the Democratic Party trying to do something that, whatever its differences, a lot of people feel is still a very important goal. The voice of a party trying to stop Donald Trump one last time.
Are you questioning people like a prosecutor or like a senator?
Both.
I am not going to be confined to Donald Trump's definition of who I or anybody else is. A crime against any one of us is a crime against all of us. This is not the first time in my life I've been called names. And it was predictable, sadly.
Do you remember which reggae star you quoted in your announcement speech?
Bob Marley.
Why did you quote Get Up, Stand Up in that speech?
Because it was all about saying we got to stand up for our rights.
So many of us have so much more in common than what separates us.
Harris's fluency with reggae inspiration, as the daughter of a Jamaican, seems to coexist with some of those more traditional credentials, a DA, an attorney general, and a fondness for, and I say this like I try to say so many things around here, respectfully, her fondness for a certain kind of California spiritual chic is playing more like an asset with a lot of young people and Democrats than the supposed gaffe that those quotes or laughs were treated as in the Beltway. Now, you can't measure these vibes or the inspiration I'm mentioning, but you can count $200 million raised here in a week, smashing records, 170,000 new volunteers. Again, we'll see whether they all show up, but if they do, that's a heck of a lot of people. And 3 million new followers on TikTok, where viral political messages reach farther than the television you're watching. It's true. I'm just going to say it's true, whether you like it or not. TikTok, one of the most visited domains worldwide, and its viewership of a big video can outstrip, say, the evening news by double and triple. So Musk and Trump may have what remains of Twitter. Harris has these more influential sites buzzing. As the New York Times put it, more liberals are making this viral Harris content, organic, homemade, faster than any top-down business or campaign can make out of a campaign headquarters. I invite you to think of these as the homemade yard signs of our time.
Bless my soul, commanders on a roll, looking like a snack while taking down the Trump patrol. I think the apple's rotten right to the core from all the things we've done from all the apples. You can't tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. Here we go!
Hey Kamala, what are we going to say to Donald Trump in November?
Bye, bye, bye.
Now, is this just for kids? Is this just for liberals? Is this just for people who use TikTok? Maybe you don't. There are signs that it is not, that what starts in the kind of creative, super fast, viral energy of today, something that Obama also benefited from with slightly different apps and tactics, is spreading farther. I bring to you a Reagan speechwriter, Peggy Noonan, who now writes for the Wall Street Journal, which is a Murdoch publication that is generally, although not exclusively, but generally very pro-Trump. She sees this dichotomy too. This thing I told you about contrasting the Beltway to everyone else, quote, among those who follow politics closely and are highly online for political content, views of Ms. Harris hardened long ago. Think of people who obsess over the Washington Post and the New York Times online or watch a ton of news in the Beltway. But she continues, quote, but to those of relaxed engagement, especially the young, she will be a new figure. They'll be seeing her for the first time. They'll be open, she says, perhaps warning, to what they see. Now, whether you think Donald Trump should not return to the White House, or you really like the Biden-Harris administration, or you really like Kamala Harris, that's politics. Ms. Noonan is referring to something that can happen through politics, but not only of politics. And that is that we might open our eyes again and see the people and policies that are on the ballot this year. Whatever people think of Joe Biden and his record and his long period of public service, there was a lot of evidence that he had become something else to so many voters, something in the way of the clarity of this choice. And it would seem now, as we're still in this now second week, 8 days into this, that this is turning a little bit, that the entire focus here, and we're only in the summer, is now back to the real stakes of these choices, and people might really see them and not be obscured by what even Democrats, what even Pelosi and Jeffries and Schumer thought was no longer the perfect standard bearer in a high-stakes year. Some of the Democrats who seemed so despondent are now delighted. Now, tonight we can report there are 99 days until the election. You might say Harris has 99 days, and a day of dyspeptic Democratic anxiety will not be one of those days left.
But I said there's a lot going on at the surface level in terms of donors and campaign positions and campaign strategy and the way they're behaving in public. There's a lot that is weird about this campaign thus far. But there is one last thing in terms of the weirdness of this campaign that I think is actually quite serious. You probably heard this weekend that Donald Trump told an audience on Friday night that if they vote for him this November, if he's voted back into office this November, they will never have to vote again. He told an audience on Friday to, quote, get out and vote just this time. He said after this time, quote, you won't have to do it anymore. You won't have to vote anymore. He said, quote, in 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good, and you're not going to have to vote. Now, this is not the first time Trump has told a campaign audience that they will never have to vote again once they vote him back in this time. And that is as alarming as it sounds for all the reasons that you immediately think it is, right? I mean, he's positing this like this is a happy thing. Oh, joy, never having the burden of voting again, right? The point of democracy is that we vote all the time, and we like it. That's how we decide what happens in our country. He's promising his followers that he'll end all of that. And it's exactly what you think it is. But let me also point out something more strange, which has been happening at the same time and hasn't had as much attention. The day before Trump made those remarks on Friday he said, you're never going to have to vote again after you vote for me this one time. The day before that, on Thursday last week, he didn't say that people wouldn't have to vote anymore once he was elected this November. Now, the day before that, on Thursday, he told his supporters not that they're not going to have to vote again, but that they don't have to vote this time, that they don't need to vote for him this November.
My instruction, we don't need the votes. I have so many votes.
My instruction, we don't need the votes. I have so many votes. He said that on Thursday last week. And it turns out this is something, when you look, he says this all the time now. Watch.
My instruction, we don't need the votes. I have so many votes.
We don't need votes. I tell my people, I don't need any votes. We got all the votes we need. I don't need votes.
You don't need votes. We got more votes than anybody's ever had.
You don't have to vote. Don't worry about voting. The voting, we got plenty of votes.
Don't worry about voting. Of all the weirdness around this campaign, this is a truly strange thing to tell people, right? Don't vote. I don't need your vote. I don't want your vote. I mean, all the surface level weirdness is, worth noting. Having a new position on literally anything you can think of as soon as any random rich guy tells you to, that's a weird thing. Picking the eccentric billionaire's intern for your running mate, even though you apparently had no idea who he was or what a disaster he is on television, all of this is weird. But telling voters, do not bother to vote for me, it doesn't matter if you do, I don't need your votes. That is a thing that should prick up your ears. Because what that means is that he doesn't think he needs to win the vote to win the election. He doesn't think he needs to win the election in order to take power. He thinks something other than votes is going to determine whether or not he gets back in the White House. At Rolling Stone today, they profile 70 different election officials who have been put into position in the swing states of Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, who are election denialists, committed election denialists, officials that have been put in place in all of those swing states to make sure that election results, no matter what they are, do not get certified in those states this year. Quote, at least 22 of these election officials have already refused or delayed certification processes in recent elections. According to Democratic election lawyer Mark Elias, quote, I think we are going to see mass refusals to certify the election in November. quote, Republicans are counting on not just that they can disrupt the election in big counties, they're counting on the fact that if they don't certify in several small counties, you can't certify statewide results. 70 officials in place across just the swing states. For all the surface level weird behavior and language and strange choices and incoherence and odd donors in the Republican campaign, the serious core at the heart of it is that they are not planning on the vote being counted as normal. They are not counting on the election results being tallied as normal. They are not counting on the vote. And in fact, Trump is now repeatedly saying the vote will not matter. He doesn't even want your vote. The Republicans are counting on the election results not being certified, thereby creating chaos in Washington around the results. Just like 2020, right? Just like January 6, 2021, except this time with no Mike Pence in the way and with Republican officials already in place in multiple states saying, yeah, you may not get any sort of official vote. The weirdness of this campaign is astonishing 99 days out. The dislocation from real campaigning, though, the dislocation from actually asking people for their votes, that means something. It means they are not trying to win this thing in a normal way. So 99 days out, as Democrats stand up what, by all accounts, looks like a juggernaut traditional campaign under Kamala Harris, are they prepared for this level of weirdness after the votes are cast? Are they ready for what's coming?
Democrats are now embracing some weird messaging when it comes to the Trump campaign, and we mean that literally. As Politico puts it, allies of Kamala Harris are shifting their characterization of the Republican presidential ticket from being a threat to democracy to just plain weird. Take a listen.
Listen to the guy. He's talking about Hannibal Lecter and shocking sharks and just whatever crazy thing pops into his mind. That is weird behavior. And I don't think you call it anything else.
I think Donald Trump, I know him, and he's probably sitting and watching the TV. And every day, it comes out, Vance has done something more extreme, more weird, more erratic.
It's not just a weird style that he brings. It's that this leads to weird policies.
You may have noticed Donald Trump has been resorting to some wild lies about my record. And some of what he and his running mate are saying, well, it's just plain weird.
Joining me now, Theron Johnson, former Southern Regional Director for Obama's 2012 campaign and a Democratic strategist. Susan Del Percio is a Republican strategist and MSNBC political analyst. Okay, Theron, what's with the weird?
Well, I'll tell you this, Chris. You're right. A lot of surrogates, the vice president herself has chosen to use this word. And I think it's a good way to describe the former president. Now, one thing that I know for sure, there are probably 10 other words that they want to use that could describe the former president. But weird seems to have a sort of tone to it and it's sticking. It's many Democrats believe that there are unorthodox things about Donald Trump before he even ran for president. But we remember how he ran early on to destroy the Republican Party. Yes, he won in 2016. And there were a lot of weird things that he said while he was president in his 4 years. And so it's got to be something that the polling data shows resonates not only with Democrats, but it also resonates with working class Americans. And this is what this race is going to come down to, is that working class Americans of all races have got to figure out who they want to vote for in this race. And I believe that Kamala Harris and her team and the surrogates are honing in on this message, because I will challenge any Republican to have a debate with me or any other Democratic strategist, and we can write down at least 25 things that the former president has either said or done that can be classified as weird. But that's not ultimately what the campaign is going to focus on for the duration. But it is something now that I think that is resonating with the base and those working class Americans.
I think, Susan, that Theron used an interesting word, which is tone, right? Something we know that voters, particularly those middle voters, have talked about. They talked about it 4 years ago. They're talking about it now. Let's hear, conversely, some of the things Donald Trump has said.
She was a bum 3 weeks ago. She was a bum. A failed vice president and a failed administration. So now we have a new candidate to defeat the most incompetent, unpopular, and far-left vice president in American history. She's a radical left lunatic. She has no clue. She has no clue. She's evil.
Evil, lunatic, incompetent, bum, as opposed to weird. Does that speak to those voters who, frankly, are exhausted by the level of vitriol in politics today?
Well, Donald Trump sounds plain old bonkers. I'm going to add that as one of the words we can use in addition to weird. And the problem for Donald Trump is the campaign may have adjusted to a Harris candidacy, but Donald Trump hasn't. He hasn't figured out what to say about her. He keeps trying these lines, and they're not going to work, Chris, because at this point, he's got to go for the middle. That's where the fight is. And he's not going to get, especially independent women in the suburbs, with that kind of language.
I mean, you talked about this again, Theron, as, being part of the tone. I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that many Democrats were using that same word at the same time. But honestly, what do you think it buys Democrats? What does it buy the campaign, and for how long?
Well, it reminds Democrats that we cannot underestimate a Trump candidacy. I'm not saying that we took him for granted in 2016, but there were many people, including myself, that thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win that race. And so we learned from our mistake. We saw 4 years of him doing the name callings. I mean, what you just showed, Chris, is only a snapshot into what the former president has said about not just Vice President Harris, but other women who he has attacked along the way. And so, again, it's a phased approach. It's driving up momentum. It's a very sort of politically correct way to describe the former president's behavior. And I think you'll hear more harsh words used to describe him as the campaign goes on, and definitely at the convention. But again, I go back to what my colleague just said. We know that the goal here is 270 electoral votes. Her choice for vice president by August 7th will play an added role into that. But ultimately, there's got to be data that shows how do you motivate the base, but more importantly, what are those moderate, independent voters, those working class Americans of all races want to hear about this man, and just compare the two. You can say a lot of things about Vice President Kamala Harris. Yes, they're going to talk about how she laughs, and they're going to talk about her being a woman. The sexism will be on Front Street going forward. But ultimately, I think that the American people is looking forward to the future. And who's the best person to continue what Joe Biden has done for this country and make it even better going forward?
Yeah, one of the interesting things, I think, in this campaign is how memes that people on the right used, they thought, to attack Harris actually have been sort of adopted, especially by a lot of younger voters, which we know they can be unpredictable, right? Mm-hmm. So she seems to be changing her social media narrative. Let me play for you a TikTok that just went out.
Hey, Kamala, what are we going to say to Donald Trump in November?
Bye, bye, bye.
Melissa Ryan, who has worked in digital strategy for progressive campaigns for Democrats, told NBC, "This is a reversal of what I saw in 2016 when it felt like Trump had just taken over the internet. In 2024, who wins the internet? How important is it?"
Well, who wins it in a positive way is Vice President Harris. She's going to keep out there with her message. And it should stand out that she's nearly 20 years his junior. So when we talk about the future, younger people, seeing Donald Trump on TikTok just really doesn't work. So,
but also,
that.
there in some of these, I think there's a question of who's having fun. And it seems like people are looking for fun.
Energy and going forward have something to bring. And just to follow up on what Theron said, Harris gets to introduce her vice president by August 7th. That's going to be a lot of media and a lot of press. Then she rolls into a convention on August 19th, and that's going to dominate. And just a month later, Chris, people start voting. So this is going to be really difficult for Donald Trump to break through.
The overriding message that we've heard by some of the vice president's allies has been just that Trump and Vance are just plain weird. Victoria, is this kind of a line of attack that could work?
It's a line of attack that can have some inroads with the folks right outside of the edges of the base of the Trump support, right? So the ones who love Trump, they're going to be with him. no matter who his vice presidential pick was. But then there's that chunk of people, I don't think it's necessarily big, but that is pushing themselves to once again, for the third time, hold their nose and vote for Trump. And the likelihood of them being able to, again, for the third time, hold their nose again is really going to be affected by these random comments, by that comment of the clip that you just played earlier about you won't have to vote in another 4 more years, which personally, to me, I'm a little bit more of a nervous Nelly than Mark. It makes me nervous, and especially being a student of Latin America, is I think about Venezuela, who just had elections. Venezuela was the paragon of democracy, not just in Latin America, but globally, and look where it is now. So I think they say really weird things, but then with an undertone of this is a worldview that a lot of these folks share.
It's interesting. And Mark, I want to go back to what you're talking about the pick of J.D. Vance as Trump's, partner on this electoral process. The Wall Street Journal editorial board wrote, quote, "An old political saw is that the best VP choice is one who gets applause upon announcement and then is never heard from again. You can tell that doesn't apply to Vance, since Trump is being asked if he still believes he made the right choice." So, Mark, how much of a problem is this for the Trump campaign, you think?
That's a great point. And when you've lost the Wall Street Journal as a Republican, that's problematic. The point that they're making there is a good one, which is that he has been not only neutral or not even positive, but he's been a distraction, and a negative one at that. The thing that is driving Donald Trump crazy right now, the thing that he hates more than anything, is not to be the center of attention, right? And Harris, no matter what your ideology or politics are, has absolutely captivated like every single news cycle since she was effectively nominated. And that's, by the way, likely going to keep happening right up until and through the convention. So she will, in effect, have dominated the headlines for a month, with the exception of the headlines that J.D. Vance has been getting, and those have been across the board all negative. So Donald Trump's getting a double-barrel dose of stuff he can't stand, which is bad press for him and good press for Harris.
And Victoria, meanwhile, Vice President Harris's campaign manager was asked about what her policies on the border would look like. Here's what she had to say.
I think at this point, the policies that are, having a real impact on ensuring that we have security and order at our border are policies that will continue.
Do you think, Victoria, the Harris campaign needs to have a specific answer on what Harris policy is at the border, the humanitarian crisis that we have been living through for years now?
So, immigration policy is something that you don't want to get into the weeds about. I mean, really here, it's about solving a problem that has been broken for over 30 years. And I think that she needs to be very clear and very resonant on that. How that is achieved is something that she can address, once after getting into the White House, because it's something that she can't do single-handedly, or any executive can do single-handedly. So I think laying out a firm and clear line and kicking back that notion that she was or is soft on the border is very, very important. And then the devil's in the details and can be hashed out later. So I think for a general audience is draw that line in the sand.
Yeah, Victoria, but then again, the fact that she was early on tasked by President Biden to be behind a study of what the root causes of migration are, and do you get it? I certainly get a sense that that hasn't been something that she nor the president have been very forthcoming about. What is it that we have learned about the root causes of migration, and how can that lesson be instituted?
I mean, immigration from time immemorial is push and pull. What's happening in the home country? So I think that is 50% of the equation. And I think you mentioned that, she references that. But given the optics of immigration today and given the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing at the border, I think you have to lead a little bit heavier with understanding the border and the needs of folks as they're looking at our southern border, while saying, but we need to look beyond the short term and the causes leading to that. And I think that's something where the policy wonks like me really dig into, but also understanding what day-to-day Americans are seeing on their TV screen.
Victoria DeFrancesco Soto and Mark McKinnon, great seeing you both. I thank you both for your time. But I want to start with Donna, who, Donna, the campaign says that Harris is looking for someone to fight for the middle class, protect freedoms. You just heard what Gabe Gutierrez was saying, that they're looking for in a partner. How do you think this process is going, and who do you think best fits that bill?
Well, first of all, I think Democrats have an amazing array of choices. And Kamala Harris certainly does in this process. On that screen, you showed 5 governors, a senator, and a transportation secretary. It is an amazing group of people. And so there's not going to be a bad choice. And I think voters and Democrats are going to trust Kamala Harris to choose the person that she wants to work with for the next 4 years to deliver for the middle class. My money is on Tim Walz, an effective Midwest governor who's a straight talker, a veteran, really effective in Minnesota. But any of the choices on that screen or not even on that screen, the Democrats have a really deep bench. And I think it's going to be a combination that is going to deliver the election for Democrats in November.
Yeah, Donna, so what about the famous blue wall? Should they be looking at someone from one of those states to maybe, shore them up on something that is so important for Democrats as well as for Republicans? But I mean, that blue wall specifically.
Well, I mean, part of the reason that I've kind of landed on Tim Walz, apart from the fact that I served with him, he was in my class in Congress. I know him well. And I think he's been a really effective governor. He's in Minnesota. Bordering Wisconsin, will have a ripple effect, I think, across that blue wall, including working families throughout Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan. And so, look, there is not a single person on that list who isn't going to be a good choice for very different reasons for Kamala Harris. She will make the right choice. We'll trust that choice. And I think voters are going to get behind it.
Yeah, I mean, Brendan, Republicans in Pennsylvania are worried about Shapiro getting picked. They think it could spell trouble for the GOP. Why do you think that is?
Well, he's an effective communicator as well, and I think he offers an image that is much more future-oriented than Tim Walz does, who is one of the older candidates there on screen. And Pennsylvania is, of all of the blue wall states, that is the most critical. If Kamala Harris loses Pennsylvania, her chances of becoming president are very low. And so that is a critical state. And yeah, people who are the best communicators, I think that's really important. But you also want to be able to demonstrate that you are a serious governing duo. And I think that's a particular, you always want someone who could govern, but I think that is particularly important right now, given the choice of J.D. Vance. That just, by contrast, appears to be a very unserious slate on the Republican side. J.D. Vance, I think, has disappointed a lot of people in the way that he has come out. And if Kamala Harris can choose someone that demonstrates that they have a serious, governing, focused ticket, I think that would be a really good contrast for the Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, speaking of J.D. Vance, he was questioned again about his 2021 comments that Democratic leaders, including Harris, are childless cat ladies who don't have a direct stake in the country and shouldn't be leading it. Here's what he said on Fox.
Do you agree that there are people who very much love this country and are invested in its future, but they also happen to be childless?
Oh, of course I believe that, Trey. And if you look at the full context of what I said, it's very clear the Democrats have tried to take this thing out of context and blow it out of proportion. Of course, for a whole host of reasons, it's not going to work out for some people. We should pray for those people and, of course, have sympathy for them. I still think that means we should be pro-family, generally speaking, as a party. And I think that our country has become particularly hard for parents, especially under the policies of Kamala Harris.
Jonathan, is this something that could blow over, or is this going to just continue having an impact and maybe a long-term impact?
Well, I think it has a long-term impact for a couple of reasons, Jose. Number one, when you listen to that clip, he's not allowing at all for the possibility that women might choose not to get pregnant in the first place and that it's their freedom to do so. This is a guy who talks about liberty, talks about freedom, talks about big government staying out of people's lives. And here he is saying basically the big government should be in women's lives to the point that the government is, if not forcing them to become pregnant, to at least encourage them. One of the other comments that he had made was that people who don't have children should pay higher taxes than people who have children. And honestly, they already do. So I'm not sure whether that's something that's disingenuous on his part or something that is ignorant on his part as a United States Senator to not know about things like dependent tax credits, about child tax credits, about FSAs, and all the various ways in which the federal government already gives advantage to people with children. But beyond, and I guess thirdly, what I would just say is, talking insensitively about Americans is probably not a good way to attract them to vote for your ticket.
I think that's a very kind of important statement. Donna, how big of an issue do you think this is for Trump at this point?
Well, I think it's huge. I mean, I think it demonstrates that this is a ticket, especially with J.D. Vance, that simply is not ready for prime time. It's almost like we're talking about Kamala Harris having a short period of time to vet candidates. It's almost like they did no vetting of J.D. Vance. It isn't just his comments about childless cat ladies, and I hope my cat doesn't run behind me, but it's also his comments about women staying in abusive relationships, about limiting women's access to reproductive care. It's a whole host of things that will offend an awful big part of the electorate. And so I think it is a real problem. And he is not going to be a governing partner. He's barely been a senator, hasn't really done anything with his life. The quality of J.D. Vance compared to the quality of the people that Kamala Harris is looking to choose for vice president is like night and day.
Brennan, Senator Schumer says that the Vance pick actually helps Democrats. Can a VP pick actually sway things?
Yeah, I don't think a VP pick really wins you anything, but it can certainly hurt you, and we're certainly seeing that already. Look, nobody likes a scold, and that is what J.D. Vance has demonstrated that he is. And I think what people are offended by is a 39-year-old man telling everybody how to live their lives. I mean, look, there are a lot of people who are effective communicators for pro-family values, but as Jonathan said, you don't do that by attacking other people. So I think he absolutely is a vulnerability that will help Democrats in a way that is just unforced error. Mike Pence, for all of the stuff that he put up with, never put really Donald Trump in any real difficult position. To great pains, he did whatever really Donald Trump did and stayed in the background. And the fact that you have your VP sticking out is not helpful. Usually, I worked for Paul Ryan when he was a VP. You want to promote the top of the ticket and you want to attack the other side. And if you're drawing attention to yourself like Sarah Palin did, you're not helping the ticket at all. So they're going to have to get their act together, train their focus more on Kamala Harris's record, or else this is going to continue to be an unhelpful story for them.
I mean, Jonathan, is that something that the Trump campaign can actually do? How are they going to be handling this going forward?
I mean, this is the first time I can remember that Donald Trump has not been able to drive news cycles. Number one, obviously the Democratic chaos for a few weeks was driving news cycles, and now Kamala Harris's transition into candidate status, all the money she's getting, all the support that she's gotten from a now unified Democratic Party is dominating news cycles. And on the Republican side, it's J.D. Vance. And to Brendan's point, if you were the vice presidential candidate and you're sucking oxygen away from the presidential candidate, and who thought that would happen to Donald Trump at any point, you are hurting your ticket. So it'll be interesting to see how the Trump team adjusts to this sort of new reality and what they do to put the candidate out front first and try to get rid of these negative storylines on Vance. But, for the time being, Vance is doing damage.